on that. And we have an agenda that rolls till 9:45, so I'm going to try and keep us moving expeditiously. Welcome to our December 5th, 2024 meeting. Briefly, the chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission for this meeting. And then we have the gavel. I'd like to note that we are starting the meeting at 7:03. Yeah, 7:03. We are live streaming the meeting on NVTC's YouTube channel. Our board administrator has already confirmed we have a new person quorum. Mr. Snyder has requested to participate virtually for a personal reason as he is out of the country on business travel. Can I have a motion to approve Mr. Snyder's request? So Mr. Alcorn makes the motion. Ms. Palchek seconds it. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Snyder, for joining us.
Thank you.
Special welcome to this evening to DRPT Director Tiffany Robinson. Excited to have you join us in person and serve on the commission as an alternate. Look forward to a report later in the agenda. I do want to give space for you to just introduce yourself to the whole commission.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Tiffany Robinson. I've been the DRPT Director for 3 weeks now. I'm really honored to join this commission and to be here tonight. Just by way of a very quick background, I came to this position from a position in the governor's office as a deputy chief of staff. Prior to that, my state service was in the state of Maryland as the labor secretary. And prior to that, as an assistant secretary in housing and community development, working on a lot of transit-oriented projects. I did spend some time in local government as well. I'm an attorney by trade. I have 2 kids in college, and I look forward to getting to know everybody better.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us and coming across the big divide, which is Maryland and Virginia. But and thrilled to have your participation in joining us.
Thank you.
So to help us move through our meeting, I'm proposing we do a block vote for our VRE action items. Any objections? Hearing none. We will move forward and we'll keep rolling through our agenda. We have, as 2024 comes to a close, it's time to be thinking about next year's NVTC leadership team. Each January, this body approves a slate of officers, and we plan to have committee memberships and board appointments. Plan to work on this again next month. Let Kate or me know if you have changed your committee preferences. At your desk should be committee information. So if you have changes, please let Kate know, and I'm happy to take your comments as well. That copy you see. So tonight we have a public hearing as part of agenda item 9 to solicit public comments on NVTC's proposed work plan for the coming year, as well as our draft resolution on NVTC's guiding principles for future transit funding. For those in attendance, we wish to speak. If you haven't signed up yet, please add your name to the list expeditiously. You will have 3 minutes to speak. We will also be accepting public comments on these items through December 27th. We have written public comments. NVTC continues to seek, do we have any, to general public comments, do we have any public comments? Ms. Mattice?
Indeed, Mr. Chair, we did receive one general public comment for tonight's meeting. It was asking about NVTC taking a position on housing policy. That comment was shared with all the commission in advance of the meeting.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to action item 2. We have the minutes. I believe they're at your seats. They're at your seats as well. We also emailed them to you. Is there any comments on the minutes? Seeing none. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Thanks, Ms. Bagley, seconded by Mr. Karantonis. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Snyder, you're an aye. Are you in support of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Great, thank you. And I think I got to remember to make sure to get the virtual component of this done. So that's item 2. Item 3. Tonight's consent agenda includes 3 items. 3A, approve resolution 2554 to extend the term of NVTC alternate to the WMATA Board of Directors. 3B, approve the Envision Route 7 BRT Strategic Implementation Plan. And 3C, authorize the executive director to issue a request for proposals for phase 4-2 of the Route 7 BRT project. So those are the three items. There's a discussion in the packet with respect to the extending the term. Mr. Aguirre's term will be extended if we move forward with this item. There's discussion on the consent agenda items 3A, 3B, and 3C. Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Mr. Aguirre, why not? Is there a second? Second from Mr. Alcorn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Snyder?
Aye.
Great. So that motion passes and the consent agenda is approved. Item 4, we're going to hold on. Ms. Garvey, this is Ms. Garvey's last meeting. She is retiring from the Arlington County Board and also thus as well this commission. So we will come back to item 4. She is, I believe, also caring for her 96-year-old mother. So it is a reasonable item to just defer. Item 5, NBT's fiscal year 2024 audit of the financial statements and compliance reports. We have our auditors from PB Mayors here tonight to give a presentation on the fiscal year 2024 audit. For everyone's awareness, the auditors met with the executive committee serving as the audit committee earlier prior to this meeting and gave a detailed overview of the audit. Mike Garber from PB Mayors is here to present. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Good evening. I know everyone's eating, so I'm not expecting any questions, so that'll make it easier. And as the chairman said, we did meet just a little bit ago and went through a higher view of the audit itself. So I will be fairly quick this evening. I do just want to report that we have issued an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. And I'll remind you, because I know you know, that that means it's clean. That's the good one. That's what you're looking for. There's also a report in the back of the document that talks about internal control and compliance. We've also issued a clean report there as well. So we had no suggestions or issues when we performed the audit. We had no audit entries. So again, I'll just point out that that's a wonderful thing. It doesn't mean that we haven't asked a lot of questions and done a lot of work and done some digging. It means that your finance team and Kate's team and everybody has done an excellent job preparing for us and providing us the documents and the things that we need. We were here on site, and we don't do that on all of our audits. Not everybody wants us to be here physically. That's okay. Everybody's still dealing with how they want to deal with remote work and things of that nature. But I think it's important to mention that we were here to do our audit work as well. We really have nothing else I think needs to be gone over with this. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have or any comments or observations that you've had with the financials.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Mike. And we want to slow. We have a fiduciary duty to make sure our financials are in order, and it is not inevitable. Folks know that on commissions, there are instances where their details have not been focused on. In this case, I think we're in good shape, but I want to give full space should anybody have any concerns or questions about I'm not asking you to stop eating or look away from your phone, but I am asking you to really, if you have concerns, I could want to provide full space for organization.
And I'll add, as you're thinking, I am always available. So if something comes up next week, next month, you have questions, or those who aren't in attendance have questions, I am more than happy to address them at that time as well. I'm always here for you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you mentioning that. Unmodified is excellent, and the details in your packets are there for you to see. We should all be proud to say NBTC has another clean audit. I sort of tried to pause there and recognize how important, and I also think it's worth mentioning, and it's been shared with me. We have had clean audits throughout Scott's 23-year tenure. I'm not trying to age you. I'm just trying to give credit. Clean audits throughout your 23-year tenure. And that has helped me that our financial management is excellent. And that is a huge resource. Mike mentioned earlier, there is in your packets a little bit of discussion. Some of this is our estimates when they're necessary, and that's important to be aware of. But Scott, just a big thank you to your team and, Calethea. I think I got that right. All right, and Brittany, I feel like it's particularly important to recognize the full team, who's doing all the work, for dealing with complicated allocation formulas, grant management, internal controls, and other items that if I were in charge of them would not be done as well, for sure. So, big thank you. With that, we will hear from Scott a little later in addition, unless there are pieces that at this stage we need to do on the audit. 5B, the action is to accept and authorize distribution of NBTC's fiscal year 2024 audited financial statements and compliance reports. Can I have a motion to so accept and authorize as I just described? So, Mr. Alcorn, motion. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Krizek. Any further discussion? Seeing none and having provided plenty of time, I hope, for such discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Snyder?
Aye.
Thank you very much. The motion passes. That is item 5. We have an accepted audit. That is a huge step. And we'll move on to item 6, which is our WMATA report. We have our WMATA, thank you very much. We have our WMATA vote, thank you, Scott, for that piece of it. We have our WMATA board members here tonight to give their reports. Paul and Matt, over to you guys.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to start by talking about our subsidy, our budget, and then Paul's going to give some important updates on bus service. So the big news for us is that we approved an updated, restructured Metro Bus and Metro Rail operating subsidy. I've been previewing that in the last few months, but it got over the finish line. There was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes over a long period of time. I want to thank Adam and especially Andrew, who spent a great deal of time on this, working with staff, Metro staff on all the details here. This is the first time we've updated the subsidy formula for Metro in several decades. Getting agreement from Virginia, Maryland, and DC, all of whom believe that they pay too much on Metro, is not an easy thing to do. So there's a couple of big policy goals, which I think we had going in that were ultimately achieved with this. The first is that we're linking subsidy to service much more directly, especially for Metro Bus. On the Metro Bus side, we've moved to essentially a pay-as-you-go type of system. So if a jurisdiction has a great deal of bus service, that's very clearly reflected in their subsidy amount. If after due consideration by the Metro Board, service is added and it's entirely within one of those jurisdictions, that jurisdiction is going to pay for that service. I think we've felt for some time that there's been a gradual erosion of Metro bus service in Virginia, in large part because of our local operators here who have picked up, but our subsidy was not necessarily reflecting that reduction. And so now it does. And you'll see when you look at the subsidy table that our numbers in Virginia are going down quite a bit. Same token, our rail number did go up. On the rail side, there's a bunch of things that went into the formula, but one of the big ones is simple question: what does it actually cost Metro to run this service? So in Virginia, we have a lot of long distance service. We have a lot of longer trips. Silver Line goes a long way, all the way out to beautiful Loudoun County. So all those miles of track require inspectors, require circuits, require signals. We have stations that have to be staffed, cleaned, all those sorts of things. So all that's baked into the formula. And so you will see that the rail subsidy for Virginia did go up. We're also looking at the share of riders in the system. As of the most recent passenger survey, the district had the largest share of riders. So they're on that part of the formula, they're paying the most. So it balances out a little bit in that way. Yes, I was about to say, so there's a couple other things with this. One is that the two airports are no longer assigned to the jurisdictions in which they reside within the Virginia number. So Virginia is still paying its share of subsidy for the two airport metro stations, but Arlington is not entirely now responsible for that section, and Loudoun is not responsible for the Dulles section. We thought that frankly didn't make much sense because most of the people who are using those stations don't actually reside in those jurisdictions. They're just getting on and they're going elsewhere. So that's one change. There were some specific changes made for our cities, Falls Church and the city of Fairfax, to provide some relief. If we had just done a straight formula, the way that the counties were calculated, quite frankly, those cities would have gotten absolutely crushed. Because a lot of especially on the bus side, a lot of the routes go through those cities into other places. You know, they're relatively small and they're in the middle of kind of other jurisdictions. So we made some adjustments there based on what made sense to sort of, you know, balance that, ensure that they still had skin in the game, but they weren't getting massive subsidy increases, which really wouldn't have been fair for them. You now get a credit for paid ridership. So this is essentially an incentive to make sure that riders are actually paying. I was going to talk a little bit more about something else we're doing in that front, but now baked into the formula, paid ridership is essentially a credit. So jurisdictions that have a larger part of unpaid ridership, which is typically not Virginia, you know, they're going to have a little bit higher bill based on that. So that's kind of the highlights. We can go much deeper if anybody wants to. Probably a better offline conversation with me if you want to. But great process there, and I think it's good for us. General manager is about to propose his FY26 budget at our meeting on Thursday. The board had a preview last 2 weeks ago, I guess, and we'll have the full presentation. I got it today in a pre-meeting. So a couple of service rail concepts to be aware of. One of them is a term that you're going to hear called super peak. Super peak service will essentially be surge service that's happening in places that we have significant crowding. Red line, orange line, silver line corridor in particular right now, essentially from Ballston east into the city on this side, very significant crowding happening, especially Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we're adding some additional trains that are going to be in that surge service. And then the great thing is we're able to do that in a cost revenue neutral way by implementation of automated train operation, ATO. So our plan is to be fully within ATO by the time the fiscal year begins next year. Just being an ATO will have a $7 million operating budget savings for us. Simply because we'll be able to run the same level of service with fewer trains because of the efficiency that we're going to be gaining. A couple things happen on ATO. From a safety standpoint, you know, we can talk about that all day long about why that's safer, but from an efficiency standpoint, we're going to actually be able to run our trains faster. They were actually designed for higher speeds than we're currently running them. Because we're non-ATO, we have self-governed speed limits that are in place. So you are going to see some gains on some of those longer runs of a couple minutes in the runtime, and we're going to be able to run those trains faster. And that is going to bring some additional efficiencies to us. You should expect there will be an increase within the guidelines of the normal subsidy cap for the jurisdictional subsidies. But when you look at, Paul's going to talk about Better Bus, but when you look at that implementation, along with the new subsidy formula, I think you'll see that Virginia's share and the locality shares are actually in a pretty good place. Couple other quick things related to things that are going to impact our budget. We're running significantly ahead of budget so far in this current fiscal year, thanks to stronger than expected ridership. First quarter, we were favorable by about 9% on our budget, which equates to about $46 million. So a lot of that, quite frankly, is ridership. We're seeing really strong ridership gains. I think we've had 42 straight months of ridership gains, which is the most of any system anywhere in the world. And so lots of good news on that front. And then we approved an operating agreement with DRPT for an additional $60.2 million in FY25 and $84.5 million in FY26, which details WMATA's requirement to complete the benchmarking assessment as described in Virginia's biannual budget, as well as an operational analysis funded by $500,000. Paul and I went down to the Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting and presented in Norfolk to the CTB, which certified that Metro had met the requirements for receiving our dedicated funding. Very good discussion with the secretary. There's a lot of turnover as was indicated by one of the departing members recently on the CTB, but I thought we had very positive conversations with the CTB members. So I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Paul for a discussion on Better Bus.
Okay, before I start, I want to also recognize, beyond the NBTC team, also Jennifer from the DRPT team, and several of your local representatives, staff representatives who make up the JCC, who also helped with the subsidy issue as well. And then special recognition to Matt as the Finance Committee Chair for WMATA. Really did put in a lot of time working with the board and others, he and I both, well, and Matt in particular, put in a lot of time to sort of get this over the line. So a lot of phone calls, a lot of talking to get it where it was. So Matt deserves a lot of recognition for that. So on the bus side, I think it's really important to remember that the cost neutral 2025 network is just the start of the Better Bus Initiative, and you've heard a lot about it in the press. This was essentially a 2-year effort by staff, jurisdictional staff, and state representatives to put everything on the table. And if we were to develop a new bus system, essentially, what would it look like? So again, a lot of meetings, a lot of work with the local jurisdictions, state representatives. Develop a bus system that is cost efficient and effective, but in a lot of cases, it's going to be increasing service to key corridors, key areas of the region that depend on bus to get to rail stations and just to get to other parts, within our region at the same cost. So we're expanding service, keeping the cost low, and providing better bus service to where it's needed. So anyway, so that was where we sort of ended up, and the GM and the board are already looking at cost-effective ways to continue moving the Better Bus network forward, which offers the region more opportunities to serve riders throughout the region. The new formulas, as Matt mentioned, and the 2025 Better Bus network will be used by the GM in his 26 proposed budget, which he will release next week at our board meeting. In November, staff previewed several rail service concepts to address crowding and system shortages, some of which Matt has already highlighted. And to fund this concept and several others in the district in Maryland, WMATA staff are working with the Metro Safety Commission to implement rail automation and separately looking at using more 6-car trains where they would be sufficient to meet various demands along the system. And let's see, process of rolling out the strengthened Better Bus fare enforcement. You may have heard about some of that in the news over the past couple of days. We had a very significant effort with staff and our regional partners, and particularly within WMATA, to enforce people paying the fare on the rail side. So now those efforts are moving to the bus side. Fare evasion has been reduced greatly on the rail side, but now we need to take those efforts, on the bus side. It's estimated starting out that I think about 70% of the people currently taking bus do not pay. And some of it though was, Metro's, own fault in a way, because, we needed to upgrade equipment, making sure all the equipment was working, because there are people that are using it that have transit subsidies and other through their employers, and they're wanting to tap into credit. So there are a lot of initiatives underway, and now those enforcement issues are moving over to the bus side. So the GM spoke to us at our November board meeting, and this is going to be a data-driven approach, as it was on the rail side, to use all the resources at our disposal to enforce payment, and on some of our routes with the highest rates of non-payment. So again, and the way the new subsidy works, jurisdictions themselves now have incentives to make sure that their riders and customers and their people pay that fare. So you'll likely see more information in the news as this continues to roll out, and hopefully we'll be able to report back some very positive things on this front. So I think
The shutdown.
the shutdown.
Right.
There we are. Yep. Okay. And finally, again, you may have seen some things coming out over your email. And if you haven't, you will be hearing about it. Want to make sure everyone is aware that the blue, orange, and silver line construction work scheduled for December 20th through the 30th. In your materials, you'll find details which include shuttle bus plans. Historic ridership during this holiday period is about 40% lower than normal. So we're eager to get the work done before the new year. And as you all know, in prior shutdowns, we don't have a third rail here in our system. So there's no simple solution to doing this. This is crucial work that needs to be done, particularly close to the core area. And we felt, given all things considered, that this would be the best time to do it. And, as always with WMATA, we just have to, rip the Band-Aid off and just do it. So hopefully not too much of an inconvenience for folks, but we figured this would be the best time of year as people are, spending time with their family or away or traveling on vacation. This would be good, and then we really get in there for the full 24 hours and, get the work done. Historically, when we've been able to do this, no promise, but usually we've been able to complete the work earlier than the stated end time. I know, some of the projects they're going to be working on are really complex, but hopefully we'll be able to open up sooner than anticipated. So that's it. If anyone has any questions or comments for.
Sure. Well, folks, thank you very much, Paul and Matt. And if folks have questions, first of all, I do think it's worth noting whenever you're addressing a financial formula with a subsidy and it is relatively crucial, that is near a Christmas miracle or whatever you want to describe it. So a big thank you to both of you for that work. I'm not saying I envy you for all those phone calls, but I do appreciate it. I think a couple of numbers that are in there, 92% satisfaction is the number that I recall from customer satisfaction. That is
all-time high.
that is awesome or wonderful. And then being above budget, is also great. And eventually, I'm sure over time, if we continue that streak of months where we're seeing greater ridership, then we will want to see how that ridership starts to, we're a ways away, but starts to approach 2019 as we get. Other questions, Mr. Rinton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A simple question on derivation of buses. I've noticed that Metro Police was more present in certain places. I even noticed that our local police was present in the same place. Is that kind of a practice, or is there a scenario that's rolled out on presence of law enforcement now when people are boarding in certain bus stations or bus hubs?
I'm not sure about the exact details of the discussions they've had with all the localities, but I know when we were looking at fare evasion, particularly say in the District of Columbia, there was cooperation with Metropolitan Police, our police department. We also have ambassadors and what do they call them? There's like safety officers.
Oh, special police.
Safety officers that have been working with folks. So it's a whole range of people that have been helping to.
We have MOUs with various local agencies outside of MTPD. I don't know on the top of my head if Arlington's one of them, but we do have MOUs with other agencies, so.
Okay, it was quite serendipitous, but I understand that, at some point you will have to have some sort of, collaboration with law enforcement because sometimes it may be needed, clearly not. But I just noticed that and I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, their approach, there's special training, I think was the approach of how they handle this. I think one of the statistics they sent us was, I think the first day they issued 170 citations, I believe, to folks. So.
Well, can you remind us where we find if the data are handy, which routes have the highest evasion rate? How they track?
That we've published. I don't think we've published we've seen the data, but I don't think we've published the data on which routes are highest, but
They're not.
There's, if you go on the Metro website, and there is a data section that has daily ridership, and you can look at it by station. It's a lot of data there. I don't think we have the Federation data. But as Paul said, the enforcement is taking a lot of different, this is a targeted enforcement period, so very high visibility to get people in the mindset of paying. Undercover officers, I mean, a lot of turnbacks, so we're turning people around. If they show up at a bus and they're not able to pay, they're gonna have to leave, or they're not willing to pay. But an important part of this is our low-income fare program. You know, one of the things that we're doing is reminding people that if you qualify, you can get a 50% discount on your Metro fare. Because we don't want to be turning away people who genuinely are having trouble paying. We want to give them an ability to ride the system at a discount. What we're really after there's a lot of people out there who quite frankly could pay and just aren't paying because it's inconvenient or they don't fit.
Oh, thank you. I continue to be very interested in that, especially because there is the social vulnerability, socioeconomic vulnerability narrative that goes with that. And I would like to know as much as I can about that.
It took a little longer to think this through because with the bus, the driver, you know, so you think about safety of your employees, and you never know how anyone is gonna react. And, you know, at times, unfortunately, we do have incidences that happen on buses because, and, yeah, you don't see that on the rails.
I understand. I've been in this situation as a passenger as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garantone. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to, and I said this before, I think the Better Bus process was really impressive. And I say that as someone who, like most of us, you know, represents a district where we lost some bus stops. I wanted to complain about it, but the process was so sound and the rationale, I think, was so clear and clearly articulated that it was hard to do that. I think it'll be important moving forward as it's implemented or when it's implemented to communicate the benefits and improvements that have now happened, right, as opposed to the prospective benefits and improvements from it. On the Metro Rail formula question, God bless all of you for being willing to engage in that process. I have always felt like the population being Matt, you know where I'm going with this, population being such a significant portion of the Metro Rail formula. A, I don't understand the substantive rationale for it. B, it obviously disadvantages Fairfax and Loudoun, maybe even more so, large jurisdictions that have relatively few Metro Rail stations and riders. And other than the District of Columbia wanting total population to be part of the formula, no one's ever been able to articulate for me the substantive rationale that total population should be such a significant part of the formula. And if I'm understanding the change, it was basically 16.5% of the previous formula, and it's 16.5% of the current formula. So it hasn't changed.
That one hasn't.
Other things have been layered.
Other things that are later on.
Was anyone able to articulate a substantive reason that total population?
So that was
the population of Fairfax was 10 million people, we'd be paying the whole thing, I guess, even if we had the same number of riders and the same number of stations. It just doesn't make sense.
So, and as you will know, Loudoun's subsidy went up more than anybody else's did, driven in part by that issue. That was probably the main point of contention that existed. I think that I'm not going to offer that rationale because this is not my argument. Those in favor of that would argue that those jurisdictions have more ability to pay because they're larger and they have a broader tax base. And well, but a little bit more than that. They are benefiting from economic development, real estate development, things like that in a greater way because there's simply more land area and more population to do that. We had quite frankly, a very fierce debate where I took the position where I wanted to eliminate that from the subsidy. The district took the position that they wanted to eliminate ridership numbers from the subsidy. Their argument was that the more ridership you have, the more you pay, and that's it disincentivizes jurisdictions to add ridership because they have to pay more. So we spent some time on each side of that equation and ultimately had to come to a compromise on issue because I wasn't going to convince the district that it should go away and they weren't gonna budge on that. I think that the paid ridership piece of this was a piece of this that's an antidote to it, a little bit, and that, you know, if you kind of, I mean, it's not designed to be favoring one jurisdiction or the other, you know, it is what it is. But Virginia has a much higher pay rate than,
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for holding the line.
Yeah.
And we'll live the fight again, maybe.
yeah, you know. But also, I will say, like, macro, I did think the bigger priority was on the bus side. Getting out of that regional bus network route thing that nobody could understand, where costs are getting allocated all over the place. And we're like, somehow, you know, there's a line that goes between Prince George's and DC, and somehow our subsidy goes up. Like, that's what was happening. So, you know, that was the biggest thing, and getting agreement on that. I knew we were gonna have to give a little on rail to do that.
And fairness was really one of the main underlying principles. You know, just putting all the pieces together
And repeatability.
and
That was
repeating.
something that makes sense, because you have to think about, like, this is fine for us to look at this formula as it is today. But let's say we do add metro service over the Wilson Bridge. And then how does those costs get allocated? But we tested this against all these different scenarios in the future that could happen to see if it made sense, you know, and
So you also looked at Loudoun's projected population growth.
yeah.
They did.
Thank
Over and over.
Yeah.
thank you, Commissioner. Good question. Thank you both for the thoughtful responses. Commissioner Pelletier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the points. Number one, absolutely agree that I think, at least from what I've seen so far, the outcomes, both the engagement and outcome of the Better Bus Network redesign, it's just so much more functional for a system that's trying to show that it's not just about rail, right, but about connectivity within our jurisdictions. And I think intuitively, it's the kind of thing I was hoping our area would finally realize, that bus needs to be on our major roadways and in our major connections to be used by more people. To that, I think it'll be critical to for us to consider for some of these, as we're doing BRT in specific routes, as we now have more sensible, I think, and useful bus networks, of really finding ways to better partner with VDOT on getting more bus priority, because if the buses get stuck in traffic, they're still not super helpful, but we know they're a very important way to move our workforce, and really people for their daily trips, or just, they're more accessible, but getting them stuck in traffic. A lot of opportunity there within the solar. And I appreciate that, my colleague, Mr. Rockenshaw, brought up, the subsidies. I was hearing you say, I haven't seen the full formula, but it seems like, every other jurisdiction around us had gotten something helpful. Getting a little worried about Fairfax and what it would mean to have this bus network, if the subsidy is still detrimental to us. So I'm happy about the bus piece, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think, and to be completely transparent and honest, if you had looked at the operating cost of Metro of opening the Silver Line, we got a really good deal. Because the way the previous subsidy works, the other jurisdictions were paying a large portion of that. So we do have to keep that in mind for Fairfax and Loudoun in particular.
And now we have a bus system or network that makes sense. It'll help jurisdictions plan for BRT lines, bus dedicated, you know, whatever you, it's gonna be very helpful now.
Yeah, and I'm excited about both the work you're doing, and as all of our regions and all of our partners are looking at it as, right, this full network, this full array of rail plus bus, right, plus the last mile, and how all those, even e-bikes and how those connections come together. So, cautiously optimistic about where we're headed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Palchik and Paul and Mr. Smedberg and Mr. Letourneau. We'll have continued discussion of Metro, but I propose that we move to our WMATA committee. And we'll engage in continued dialogue. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Chair, WMATA Committee Chair Alcorn and Legislative and Policy Committee Chair Aguirre to lead us through agenda item 7. Chair.
Right, thank you very much. So the WMATA Committee and Legislative Policy Committee met for a joint meeting So we did at that meeting, see a presentation from MBTC staff on a number of items, including relating to long-term transit funding. Also, we did, as part of that, get a draft series of MBTC guiding funding principles. And we're going to be talking about that later in this meeting. The committee's also reviewed the two actions under the agenda tonight. Our report on the performance condition of WMATA and our 2025 legislative and policy agenda. We're right into 7A.
Sure.
So 7A is an action item, we motioned here in a second, but last month we received a detailed briefing from Mr. Hager on the 2024 report of performance and condition of WMATA. And it's provided to the commission, the full draft, in the meeting packet tonight. So as a refresher, the report includes 10 policy recommendations directed to WMATA and other stakeholders in the region. Details on WMATA's use of dedicated capital funds in fiscal year 24 and several performance measures required by state code. MBTC staff has integrated comments from that draft report that's in the meeting that's put in. So tonight we're going to be asking for authorization to send the report to the governor and the General Assembly by the December 15th deadline as required in statute. So I asked WMATA Program Manager Adam Hager to answer any questions that anyone might have. Anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Chair Alcorn, and Mr. Hager is available. Is there questions regarding the report that will soon go to our government? Seeing none, can I have a motion to authorize the Executive Director, Mr. Tice, to send the 2024 annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA to the Governor and General Assembly? Thank you, Senator Evans. You are dangerously close to not having the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Palchek. Any further discussion? Open it. We have discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for being on your toes remotely. Appreciate it. The motion passes. Now, back to Mr. Alcorn, and I think actually over to Ms. Tice, who will speak to the, if it's okay with you, Chair Alcorn,
Yes.
will speak to the various work NVTC is doing to find a long-term, sustainable, dedicated funding solution for our region, for our WMATA and transit systems. Over to you, Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you know, there's a number of active regional and Virginia-focused conversations on finding this sustainable long-term funding for our transit agencies. The DMV moves, collaboration between WMATA and the council governments is looking at transit agencies, their needs, better opportunities for integration and regional funding solutions with our partners in DC and Maryland. And SJ 28 is a Virginia General Assembly study that is looking at Virginia funding solutions and cost containment strategies for WMATA as well as for transit agencies in Northern Virginia. So you're going to hear this evening from commissioners who are in leadership roles on both of these efforts, and we have a number of people actually around the table who are sitting as part of these efforts. And so as these efforts are speeding up, there's a great deal of NBTC staff work that's happening to support and respond to these things. And there's also opportunities for the commission to start taking policy positions on funding issues and topics. And so one of those, and I'm going to talk after we get a briefing, Senator Evan and Mr. Smedberg, is talking about a guiding principles for future transit funding resolution that we're putting out for conversation here this evening for action in January. So I'd like to turn it over to Senator Evan, who's the chair of the SJ 28 Joint Subcommittee, to provide a report on progress to date.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. The SJ 28 Joint Subcommittee held its final meeting of the year on November 12th, where staff from the Virginia Transit Association, Metropolitan Washington COG, and MBTC staff provided several presentations to the Joint Subcommittee on statewide transit funding, the impact of telework on transit, and post-pandemic transit trends in the region. Virginia Transit Association Executive Director Danny Flower shared that the funding gap affecting public transit is happening in systems across the Commonwealth. This was helpful to us because while the Joint Subcommittee is focused on the Northern Virginia transit agencies, we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what statewide needs so they can be part of any potential solution. One of the big tasks that the joint subcommittee is to review up to 15 different types of revenues that could be used to support additional transit funding. The subcommittee started with 10 revenues, including things like sales tax, transient occupancy tax, grantors, gas tax, and others. We pulled from the MVTC 2023 Metro Operating Funding and Reform Working Group report. At our meeting, we approved the following 5 for additional research, and those are regional highway use fee, regional income tax, retail delivery fee, expanding the time and direction of I-66 inside the Beltline tolling, and 5th was the regional motor vehicle rental tax. The subcommittee will receive estimates for all 15 sources early next year, and specifically estimates will include numbers for revenues generated in the MVPC district and the PRTC district, and also at the statewide level. While SJ 28 has been looking at evaluating revenue options, the subcommittee also received presentations from WMATA on their efforts to control costs and find efficiencies. WMATA staff provided an extensive overview of efforts to date and potential future efforts at our September meeting. And we're planning more work in 2025 in the area of cost containment. And additionally, and I wanted to mention, we're really supported by a great staff team and our technical working group. We're making sure we get great analysis and are also in close coordination with the DMV Move staff to integrate data and findings at key points during the study.
Thank you, Senator Evans, for the report, and the revenue estimates are particularly interesting, as well as the broad scope, but I know you have been taking a strong leadership role in this. Very grateful for that work. Are there questions or comments on SJ 28 from folks? We are all then likely to wait with keen interest as to the additional estimates as well as the continued work. But thank you, Senator Evans, for the leadership and the work. I'd like to turn it back over to DMV Moves, our other key piece of this that's working, and Task Force Co-Chair, Mr. Spedberg, for an update on DMV Moves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So DMV Moves, the task force, which is the large coordinating committee, and then there are various work groups off of that. We met this past Monday, where we had our first, I would say, really robust discussion about opportunities and cost of potential transit systems and funding scenarios that were presented and discussed. As a reminder, the focus of DMV Moves is the entire Washington, D.C. region. So the metro, essentially the metro compact region, but it does include VRE and MARC and, some of the local, transit system that ultimately is part of that. We had the opportunity to discuss 4 funding scenarios developed by staff. The first scenario would limit funding needs to support existing transit service and provide a baseline level of state of good repair. Scenario 2 would expand to enhance transit service and continue to provide a baseline of state of good repair. Scenario 3 would further enhance transit service and baseline state of good repair. And finally, scenario 4 would do all of the previous 3 scenarios, plus include major transit expansion. So it was really no surprise. All these scenarios required additional funding beyond what is currently available by the existing revenues, ranging from an additional $645 million and going up from there. In general, the members of the task force shared support for scenario 2. And again, scenario 2 would expand to enhance transit service and continue to provide baseline of state of good repair. So scenario 2 would cost an additional $600 million for WMATA needs and $250 million for state and local transit providers in fiscal year 28. We aim to meet important service increases for local bus, commuter rail, as well as metro, and will cover important state of good repair, capital improvements and investments. It is important to recognize that from a Virginia perspective, we will need to identify a permanent funding source for any additional funding the General Assembly found for us to help address WMATA's bill in fiscal year 25 and 26. The task force also had a good discussion on whether there should be one uniform regional funding solution or that the 3 states would develop their own solution to meet their share of future metro needs. There were some different viewpoints on the topic from our partners in DC and Maryland, but we heard that each state would generally develop its own funding package, but with opportunities for more regional and unified components. The task force has questions and will continue to discuss the funding scenarios and the model for funding at its next meeting on January 24th. I will add that there are now 6 DMV moves working groups that are tasked with advancing a series of action plans to implement policy recommendations on fare policy, service guidelines, wayfinding, bus priority strategies, shared procurement, and consistent training and certification. And a lot of these are to get at efficiencies and where we can save money as a region. So we can lower the cost of, running, transit systems. For instance, with bus, everyone mentions bus. Is there a way that we as a region can pool together and buy buses, train people the same way, help with bus shelters, do all the things that are going to lower the costs for you all, really? So anyway, that's all those things are on the table. Anything with procurement is another big area. So that's it. And really, Kate was there, Delegate Sickles was there. And just as a reminder, this task force is made up of key elected officials throughout the region. So from Virginia, it's Jeff McKay, Matt. That's right. You were there.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot. I saw that.
Maybe too much.
Yeah. And we have, as I said, Delegate Sickles and others, but and we have their counterparts from Maryland and then the district members. So really is a really great group, and it really was a great discussion. And I think it was a big step forward to coming up with something, later, later in the year, given our timeline. So,
Thank you. Questions?
That's it.
Thank you very much. And I thought you guys really did it. Both you and Charles Allen did a great job facilitating, and it was a good conversation. And what you described with the different scenarios and the costs, it was important conversation for sure. Are there questions that commissioners have on this, on DMV moves? Of course, it's easier to have great conversations when you're not pointing to specific revenue sources just yet that will be, of course, covered and ought to be covered. There was discussion of cost containment in addition, and several points that we discussed a little bit in executive committee, but that was also a key part of it. Are there questions? Opening it up to everyone, and you do not have one up. You do not have one off the tip of your tongue. So a big thank you as well to Ms. Matthijs. Oh, yes. Yes.
Feels a little bit like an elephant in the living room. Is there any discussion about the changed political situation in Washington? Not really.
Not really. I mean,
It's hard to know, right?
There was,
yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, no, I mean, not really.
that preceded, I guess there was a statement today, someone told me that about back to work, but it preceded that statement, and there was only sort of a little bit of brief allusions that I remember of, whether there could be continued growth in operating and ridership that might result. It really is not that it felt like a reasonable question. It's just, at least from my individual perspective, it felt on Metro, it could be a positive development, Metro alone, and it felt a touch speculative, at least to me. I don't know what the changes.
Yeah, so practically speaking, we'll have 2 new Metro board members because the federal government has 2 appointees. Paul and I were both on the board for the previous Trump administration. We had 2 excellent board members that were appointed. So hopefully that will be the case. But otherwise, you know, PREA funding, always a discussion. We'd like to see PREA indexed. Because 150 million from 10 years ago, it's not what it is today. But, you know, really hard to say. I can tell you that like Metro management and the board a little bit, we've had discussions about how to maximize our opportunities and, you know, work with the new administration on certain particular projects and aspects of our operation that they may have interest in. So,
Levy, I think, you know, the biggest question may be coming from Congress itself, maybe not from the administration, depending on how they approach things. Yeah,
I knew you really couldn't answer, but this is
Yeah,
helpful.
Yeah, and, you know, it just a level set, you know, again, Metro is the only system in the country really that doesn't have some stream of dedicated funding. And a lot of the money Metro gets has never been matched state. So that is a real issue. I mean, I think people are a little nervous about where PREA goes, because, you know, we have to keep going back and getting reauthorized. And it's always sort of on the chopping block, just because. And our delegation has been great in protecting that, but, you know, should it go away, I mean, that could potentially be an issue for sure, financially for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just kind of wondering what the background conversation.
Yeah, but there's no
was.
indication yet that it really wasn't discussed.
I'm glad you asked the question, Mr. Waukesha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this the time to talk about the resolution also, or?
That's
No,
coming
that's
up next, but you can go for it.
All right, it's connected, maybe DMV moves. And one of the recommendations in our report was related to the reserve fund. And I know, you know, we've talked about that before, and you all have articulated Mata's interest in it and the rationale for it, and Secretary Miller maybe expressed some concerns about the timing and when does it make sense to do that. I guess my question is, does it make sense in the context of DMV moves or SJ 28, or even in our resolution to articulate that when revenue sources are identified, WMATA will move forward and implement the reserve fund, utilizing a portion of those revenues?
Well,
I don't know the board's position that you want to have the reserve.
it was not the position of the state of Maryland. So
yeah.
when we talk about but we would have a reserve fund in place, but one of our jurisdictional partners did not support it, so it could not happen under our governance model.
And part of the push to have it, were mainly, you know, so when Matt and I were up with the bond houses with the GM and the CFO, one of the first questions from every bond house was,
Yeah.
do you guys have reserve?
Right.
Oh, that's right, you guys have. So when are you gonna put one in place?
Yeah, I mean,
Because for funding and bonding, we'd have lower costs if we had the reserve
Well, I
in
guess
some
then
form
for
or
us-
fashion.
Given that it was one of our recommendations in the report, perhaps it makes sense to be included in reference to it, at least in resolution, maybe.
It also, second, it would also help put the board a little bit more in control in terms of oversight with things. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Great question. Yes, Mr. Atlas.
So yeah, just to follow up on that, I like the suggestion. It might need to be worded a little differently just because the guiding principles are a little bit higher level. So
So we can turn to the resolution. I mean, there was, just to add enough context, Chair McKay, I thought offered some, at 2 different points, offered some very helpful comments with respect to potential funding mechanisms and they offer the Virginia share of any kind of potential funding mechanism. That are great, but they're not being asked to subsidize. So he said that a couple of times. There was also a robust discussion of a couple of other issues that I just thought that was worth adding. I hope it's okay that I did, Mr. Spenberg. So let's turn to the resolution now. I guess I wonder, I don't know if this is in the script, so Mr. Tice, I could envision it being plausible to, when you're sending follow-up materials, sharing the DMV slide deck, just because after 7 or 8 at night, I might not listen to every word that each one of us has said. So is that plausible? Okay, just because I think that'd be helpful. And so now we'll turn to Mr. Alcorn for the resolution.
Yeah, just a very brief intro. We've already started talking about it, but we did have very lively discussion at the joint committee on what should be included in the resolution. So this is really the first major step of guiding where this process and these processes end up. So it's very important, I think, for us to think through what's important, what guidance should exist. So with that, I turn it over to Kate to walk through the
Yeah, thank you.
working draft.
Thank you, Mr. Alcorn. So indeed, included in your materials, and I've got some slides, and they're both at your place, and we'll have them up on the screen. Is a draft resolution, for MBTC's guiding principles on future transit funding. And again, it's been stated, this is an opportunity just for the commission to state its priorities with SJ 28 and DMV News. And then as they move towards recommendations, our expectations, obviously, the commission then has an opportunity to come back with additional resolutions moving forward. Just for a little bit of history and context, and we actually do have a long history of doing these types of resolutions. The last major one that we did was actually back in 2017. And so I know there was a handful of folks around the table who were involved in that, but many of them weren't. And it really was a result of months of discussion talking about WMATA governance. Those remember the Reagan Hood study. There was a lot of things that were going on. And these were the resolution that we had at MBTC was laying, again, the commission's priorities moving into what ended up being the dedicated funding conversation in 2018. And so again, there's sort of a history of getting down, so we get a sense of sort of the commission. And so what it ends up doing, of course, is memorializing our positions and priorities. And honestly, so both staff and all of you can advocate with our partners, with the federal government, with the Commonwealth, with DC, with Maryland, et cetera. So when we sort of think of our legislative agenda, this actually provides that same sort of backing and getting a sense of the commission. So the draft resolution you had before, as mentioned, was previewed to the WMATA committee and the legislative health committee 2 weeks ago. And we've updated, and I'll be honest, ridership numbers are even higher than we put in the earlier draft. So there's gonna be things we're gonna be refining and updating. By the way, there are 2 million people riding transit in Northern Virginia every week. Now, it was 1.5 just 1 or 2 months ago. So ridership's going good. I just wanted to say that because there's a lot of moving parts.
Just very quickly, we're not voting on this.
No, we are not voting on this tonight.
So it's not a speak now or.
No, thank you, sir. So, so indeed, so what I've got, up on the slides is, the background, the details, there's lots of background as well as in the principles within the materials that you have here, but just to sort of walk through it high level. Obviously sort of grounding ourselves in the background of what's going on, the COVID-19 pandemic, they're upending the financial operating model of most, if not all, transit agencies in the United States. Inflationary factors, as well as that combined with the reduction in revenues has really led to budget deficits actually anywhere from sort of $340 million to $3 billion at the largest public transit agencies in the country. And what's happening in Washington, D.C. is not unique to the country. We have all heard, of course, WMATA is facing operational deficits starting in 27, capital fiscal cliff in FY 28. VRE is also facing operational budget shortfalls starting in about FY 28. PRTC OmniRide, and no, obviously that's not within our district, but a lot of these conversations are including them. They've already hit a fiscal cliff, and they are basically kind of cobbling together money 1 year at a time. So this is going to keep happening until that gets resolved. And then, as was mentioned earlier, local transit agencies across the Commonwealth are facing a disconnect between revenues and costs right now. So that's something that's happening all across the board. I'll say, I love saying it many times, is that the transit network in Northern Virginia is now serving 2 million people a week. And of course, it's supporting jobs and households that annually generate at least 1.5 billion in income and sales tax to the rest of the Commonwealth general fund. And so we'll obviously always state that. And again, through this document, we have an opportunity to articulate our priorities in advance of decisions being made at DMV News and SJ 28 as we go into the new year. So jumping in, it's really organized in 3 different ways. We go to the next slide. There's a section on cost containment. Then there's a section, I'll go into in a minute, on all transit systems funding, and then specifically some things related to WMATA. So when it comes to cost containment, think of in many ways, this resolution also sort of dovetails off of the annual report of WMATA that you just approved. So obviously, we're taking all of those recommendations that were already sitting in that report, just highlighting them, and basically continuing to say that we are going to be seeking continued efforts by WMATA as well as VRE and all of our systems to implement the cost containment strategies, find operational efficiencies and measure progress. And so again, we've got a number of those things articulated in the annual report. And so that's something, thankfully, we constantly are getting updates from WMATA and from others on those things. So that's the first sort of cost containment priorities. We go to the next slide. When it comes to seeking long-term sustainable dedicated funding for all public transit agencies in Northern Virginia, what the committee and staff are recommending is making sure that there's adequate growth in any revenues. So they're going to meet current and future operating needs. So this gets at the growing, the index, what have you. So this is not something that's just sort of a flat rate. The second one is speaking to something that we often have talked about in our legislative agenda is preserves existing local, regional, and statewide revenue streams. This is not taking from one place to another, shifting other revenue sources that are already being used for other things, but they're ensuring that that preservation exists. The third one, which I know came from a number of our commissioners, is wherever the solution is actually reducing the pressure on local property taxes of all of our localities as a funding source for transit. That is an important part of it, but making sure that when the burden, when the revenues, for example, SJ 28 is looking at, it doesn't all fall back on the locality's property taxes. Number 4 is ensuring that whatever solution comes out of, we maintain a diverse range of revenue sources so that not everything is all in one bucket. Right now, the Commonwealth Transportation Fund is actually 8 different sources of revenue. That's the type of model. So therefore, if you end up even adding 1 or 2 with the local to solve this, we still maintain that diversity, but that's something that we recognize. In localities around the country where they all have a single revenue source, and oftentimes that is a sales tax, it means when the years are great for sales tax, those transit agencies are doing well, but when there's a decline, all of a sudden they're hurt really bad. Having that diversification provides a little bit of stability there. And then finally, we do, the committee and the staff are recommending, we have obviously a long history and a very clean audit history of NVTC and the way we manage finances here. We think that that's a perfectly reasonable place. We're talking about a regional transit funding, that this would probably be a good place where transit funding comes through, just like the trust fund does now. So that's the last one for all systems. I don't know if I should pause now or if you want me to go through all of them before taking questions, because the next one's just a lot of specific.
I don't yet see burning questions. Let's do it.
Okay.
Their questions and we'll come to you after that.
Absolutely, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so the last one is specifically focused on WMATA and the unique characteristics that we have of being sort of this tri-state region. And also the fact that we do have federal commitments with funding like PREA. So the number one there is that we want to continue that there's a federal commitment to both maintaining the formula funding that WMATA gets, but also that stated good repair funding that we find under PREA continue to be funded and are adjusted for inflation, which is something that we heard our board members speak to a little bit earlier. When it comes outside of the federal funding, this is again came up with DMV Moves, which is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Really, Virginia should figure out how to come up with the Virginia part of that versus there being a single type of revenue that DC, Maryland, and Virginia. It may actually end up that all 3 decide on a similar revenue source. But this proposes that it's important for Virginia to come up with a Virginia solution, just like Maryland should come up with their solution and DC should come up with theirs. The third one is very much focused on making sure that there are, and again, this is about WMATA, but if there are revenues generated in Virginia, that they reflect, or the money that goes to WMATA reflects the bill for Virginia for WMATA. So for example, if there's a lot of revenues that are generated here in Virginia, and let's say there's more generated than that's needed for WMATA, perhaps those should be going to other transit or other transportation purposes. It's not that Virginia should pay a higher portion of the WMATA bill just because our revenue came in. Hopefully that makes sense. Number 4 is focused on maintaining the strong partnership we have with the Commonwealth of Virginia. to have that equal funding partnership so that, when we look to statewide, Commonwealth Transportation Fund funding, that this speaks to having at least 50% of the overall, costs or funding to WMATA really reflects the economic benefits that the WMATA system provides to the rest of Virginia. The fifth one, speaks to, if we end up identifying revenue sources within Virginia, that there is at least a thought about how those are raised in a consistent manner across all of our jurisdictions. I think that's definitely, I defer to all of the local government folks on how that works. But the idea being is that we think regionally about a regional funding source and how that's applied. And then finally, this is one of the challenges that exists right now in the dedicated funding for WMATA that was passed in 2018. Not all of it's actually available for debt service. And so this is something that we know we've heard from WMATA, is that if there is a revenue source directed for WMATA, that it actually is structured in such a way in the General Assembly so that it actually can be 100% used for debt finance. So again, these are proposed principles from the commission. We're obviously would love to hear comments and feedback, whether here or between now and our next meeting. We'll be coming back and asking for approval at our January 16th. That's our January meeting on the 16th. So Mr. Chair, I'm happy to turn back to you for questions and comments.
So I think that the goal is not to group, litigate, and write every comma, but it is to period, et cetera, but it is a surface substantive issue. And I want to just, and I could have misread, I do not know that your question, James, is currently addressed in the draft. Does not seem to me, but that doesn't mean we have to read, you know.
And I would just submit it, your committee will meet again, so.
Yeah, is it coming back there? Is it coming back to the commission?
So it's going to be coming back here, but I have already taken a note of something to the extent of in identifying what, when you're finding the revenues, ensure that there's enough to allow for reserve, correct? And that's what we want to make sure that there's ample funding to provide for reserve.
From my standpoint,
Or is it a little bit different?
I don't know. James, you say it's different, James. I think it's important that you raise the issue and consider it. I would not say, at least for my part, that we know the conclusion to having raised the issue. But I do think it's worth considering. And if the will is, a little bit, I defer to fellow commissioners, but I think we need to analyze the question you raised. I'm not sure yet whether that means per se we should include it given the Maryland context. I'm just on the fly. I'm not sure at this moment. But I do think that doing some consideration over the coming month is super important. And I would recommend at least that you loop back with James and perhaps Paul or Matt to address the question.
And indeed, these are NBTC priorities, so it could be that our priorities may not end up aligning with other jurisdictions,
Sure.
but it is an opportunity for us to articulate. So we can definitely work on how to.
Yeah, I'm happy to workshop it. I'm not wedded to it or any particular language.
Yeah, we have, so that's one point. We have like whereas clauses, also called recitals. We have like 90 of them in there.
That's also.
And I'm not saying I've read all of them, and but I do think everybody knows that in a 4-page document, if there's one recital that ticks off one person who's the wrong person, that can be a thing. It's not as important as the enactment that you and the slide deck that you went through, but opening the floor more broadly to folks, if you have concepts that you want to surface, I think we shouldn't have a totally perfunctory nor a litigating every comma conversation. Yes.
Yeah, so just two quick thoughts. First of all, something we might want to consider that's not in our funding priorities. We don't mention the fare box. And, we might, I don't know, we might want to put something in here about people, riders who can afford to pay, should contribute or should help pay for the service or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, if folks have a different idea, then I'm certainly open to it. And the other thing is just more of a process thing. Most of us here are elected officials. We communicate with our constituents. I think for me, this is the time when we need to start socializing this. We need to start educating our constituents, people in our communities, about the guiding principles, about what the situation is, why we're doing this, and frankly, bring people in to help us think through how we fix it. So anyway.
Sure. Ms. Garvey, and then Mr. Bierman.
I like James's thought about, I'll just
Sure.
put it, by the way, this is my last bite of the apple, so.
Yeah, we're about to come back to honor you. So, yes.
Yeah, and then also a little bit on what you said, Walter, and I brought it up in committee, again, not in here, so maybe it's not appropriate, doesn't fit. I like as a principle that those that benefit from the system pay for it. That would be the federal government, that would be the riders, and it also to me would be the people of Virginia, because this part of the country is basically at 42%, I think, of the income of the state. So the whole state benefits. So it seems to me making that clear, and that seems like a basic benefit that most people, like our, constituents would understand, right? You benefit from it, you help pay for it. And then we get everybody.
Yeah.
My 2 cents.
That's very helpful. The 50% number is in there, and we have had a discussion over the past year about making sure that Commonwealth contributes. I would say that there is a strategic advocacy question as to whether we all know we pay a fair bit, and we're not trying to shirk that responsibility as a region. But there's a strategic question as to whether we need to be the ones pointing out to that component of it. I think you were referring more to the Commonwealth.
I just think a lot of people in parts of Virginia have no clue that they benefit at all from what Medicare does, and that's what people always. And I'm sorry, I think you actually had your hand up before.
No. And then we'll go to Ms. Bierman, Mr. Bierman, excuse me, but we are coming back to you with an agenda item now that you maybe finished dinner, so just be prepared.
Check if I've got spinach. We're good.
Mr. Bierman,
I'm okay for now.
you sure?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll talk to offline.
okay, that's good. Other questions, thoughts? Yes, sorry.
Thank you. No, I'm looking at the very last bullet, the very last page. And I'm looking at a couple typos. I appreciate the look at the bond debt service. I'm definitely not an expert, but I know that I rely very much on our county bond experts on doing that. I don't know if this has been looked at, or really has that expertise, might have more nuanced suggestions on that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we'll let folks work through. At DMV Moves, there was assurance that a lot of the potential revenue sources were bondable. And so but I still think it's useful for one of us to just loop and make sure that Mr. McIsaac or someone else, this is the bondability question.
Yes.
And so we will follow up on that. I'm glad you asked. Because if it isn't bondable, it isn't good enough. Andrew, have I got the question right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is largely about, from Modest perspective, through DMV Moves, they've indicated that just like dedicated funding in 2018, their ability to bond on it is predicated on how it's set up. So that's an important consideration. And more detailed pieces, of course, we're trying to be up here, how we talk about it.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Palchik. And both always, you guys are on the periphery of my eyesight, so make sure you holler at me if I haven't asked. Mr. Walker.
Okay, sorry, and I apologize, I've been in 3 or 4 meetings where I've looked at this language, all of a sudden I'm coming over.
That's out of order.
I'll start with maybe the simpler one, but on the last slide, the first point continues the strong federal, and then I just wonder whether we don't want to reiterate what I think has been our position historically in support of federal operating funding as well. Or is that too interface? You talk about, we're the only system in the nation without dedicated revenue. We're the only system serving a nation's capital in the world that doesn't receive operating assistance from that nation's federal government. So that's a consideration. Maybe a more complex one on the previous slide with the funding priorities for all systems. The fifth point distributes revenues to MVTC for allocation of plus systems, BRE, et cetera, et cetera. And this gets at kind of one of the fundamental challenges with respect to BRE, and that BRE MVTC jurisdiction, like PRTC jurisdiction. So a solution that SJ28 or DMV Moves develops that provides funding for MVTC jurisdictions, that provides no new funding or options for PRTC jurisdictions, is a huge problem here in perspective. And I think we may wanna find a way to articulate that, or at least not rule that out as this language maybe.
And if I just clarify, right now, all state revenues and state generated revenues are actually managed by MVTC for VRE. PRTC manages the federal, so there actually is a division of labor.
Yeah, but if,
I-
if, for example, we had a sales tax, MVTC jurisdictions were able to impose a sales tax to fund WMATA, et cetera. PRTC jurisdictions either weren't afforded that option or chose not to pursue it, then, that would be a huge challenge in terms of BRE's jurisdictional subsidy funding. And I think we need to account for that.
James, you raised a really interesting point because during some of the DMV moves discussions, you know, I mean, it's mainly the Metro Compact, but you're also taking into account the COG membership.
Right.
So it goes beyond the traditional boundaries that we usually talk about. Yeah. So there are there's people, one or two might be actually at the table, but they are definitely part of the discussion.
Right.
So it is a challenge there as well.
So
And it has been talked about.
it seems like there's an open question as to whether there's an additive sentence or concept that we might, I don't know how to finesse it, but I'm glad that you raised it, James, and I appreciate you mentioning COG. Ms. Prisman.
Thank you. I wasn't gonna say anything, but since I have another topic, I do want to support Mr. Walkinshaw's concept about talking about the reserve fund from a fiscal responsibility perspective. Mostly, not just from like the revenue perspective, but fiscally responsible with your boundaries and stuff, so that you can be smarter about how you're using your money. This isn't necessarily about the resolution specifically, but does Maryland have a similar group to NBTC? And have we talked to them about doing a similar resolution? Because wouldn't that be, okay, wouldn't that be stronger?
Well, they had the Suburban Maryland Transportation Commission, is that it?
WSTC.
Yeah,
WSTC.
with
Washington.
But it's
Okay.
not,
It's nowhere
not
near.
like this.
They would love to have an NBTC. I think one of the deputy secretaries is trying to move toward that.
Well, but if you remember, they don't, the state pays all the bills.
The state
there's
pays.
no local.
So the
There's no
locals
local.
don't have the
Okay,
same,
okay.
although one of the board members comes from one of the jurisdictions, but they don't have quite the same.
Okay, I was just
Statement.
wondering if there were some other allies that we could bring onto the team, but sorry if that was a big
But
question.
we do talk to colleagues in Maryland, even state government as well as the WSTP and DC. We actually have a very good, there's a lot, in fact, drafts of this because it was in the public domain, we've been sharing this. So,
I'm glad you raised that, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really a process question. Could people get their comments in, say, within the next, 2 weeks, so that we have pretty much a finished product to share at our next meeting, rather than some things coming in very late before that meeting, people are caught off by surprise, and there's a lot of wordsmithing that has to go on. So I just wanted to throw out the process, maybe to get these changes in and to get this out to commission members as soon as possible, so that there aren't any surprises when we meet again to approve this.
Avoiding surprises on the dais is always a good strategy in my lived experience and spoken like a former and future chair. So I guess the question, a little bit for Ms. Mattice, keeping in mind, I think our meeting is January 16th. And halfway between now and then is New Year's Eve, probably. So let's not choose that date, but I also would say that in the context of the conversation that we're having, I don't know who was here in 2017 or who is a federal, because we got probably a couple of federal advocates here. My experience with principles like this is that they can be super, super, super important, but they're usually as good as the amount you dig into them. So I kind of feel like I need to set aside a half hour or 45 minutes or an hour to just sit with these and work them. And I'm not saying everybody in the room has to do that, but I would say that it will be powerful if we can keep coming back to these principles. And so, maybe, Kate, you can do a little brainstorming in the next couple of days and see if there is a way to maybe it's January 7th. That's later than you wanted, Dave, but it still gets us in the ballpark of not trying to rewrite at the next meeting. So that's my best attempt to leave the chair role in a good space. Yes.
And just very quickly, if I could ask staff to follow up on looking into Supervisor Walkinshaw's discussion about PRTC and other jurisdictions. There's also another issue relating to WMATA. And it's basically riders, users of the system that live outside of the WMATA jurisdiction. So I'm not sure it's that big of an issue now. It's probably a little bit on the margins, but as we're looking at any guiding principles, we might want to think about that. And maybe it gets back to what you're talking about in terms of who's benefiting from the system.
And that has come up at DMV.
Yeah, some guy named Kay mentioned it.
Yeah.
So, misguided jurisdiction, but agenda. In any event, I think we're at that moment where probably, people could say more things, but we can keep moving and asking for you to pick up the items that have been surfaced, Kate, and maybe work towards whatever you think is that prompting thing that can get us to do work before we get to January 16th. So with that, we will hear from, we're going to do one more item, and then Chair Garvey, you're going to be on the spot for after that, just to warn you. But first, we're going to have Chair Aguirre, who will provide his report from the Legislative Policy Committee for those legions of people following along on YouTube and colleagues in the room. This is item 70. Over to you, Chair Aguirre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So last month, the commission reviewed a draft of MVTC 2025 federal and state legislative agenda, which has been developed in close coordination with the Legislative and Policy Committee. At the November commission meeting, several commission members expressed interest in ensuring legislators were providing information on cost cutting and efficiency measures that WMATA has undertaken in recent years. MVTC staff are developing an issue brief separate from the 2025 legislative and policy agenda to highlight these achievements, which will be shared with commissioners, stakeholders, and legislators once it is finalized. The full set of MVTC's 2025 legislative priorities are detailed in the agenda packet. The 2025 Virginia legislative session begins on January 8th, and MVTC staff will be monitoring the General Assembly and communicating with legislators on issues impacting transit, transportation, and Northern Virginia. While we don't have a significant ask of the state legislative plan for 2025, we are gearing up for a much larger ask in 2026 once SJ 28 and the DMV News groups both wrap up their work with funding recommendations both for the Commonwealth of Virginia and larger DMV region. I believe Daniel Nickelbaum is available to answer any.
Thank you, Chair Aguirre. Do we have commissioners have any questions on our legislative agenda? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve? And sorry if we didn't give you questions to answer, Mr. Nickelbaum. Can I have a motion to approve the 2025 legislative and policy agenda? Thank you, Mr. Bagley and Mr. Aguirre. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Snyder?
All right.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. Now we'll go on to the General Assembly State of Play. We have Carter Whitlow from Commonwealth Strategies sitting in for a community provide an update in advance of the upcoming General Assembly session scheduled to begin. My goodness, already on January 8th, 2025. This would be followed by the Executive Director giving any federal update and a reminder about the legislative forum with the interview that I mentioned earlier. So over to you, Mr. Whitlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As you said, we're starting on January 8th, 2025, and actually in February 22nd, 2025. So this is going to be a very quick, hopefully, session this year. And it's the earliest possible start and possible finish that you can have at your assembly session. So we're looking forward to possibly finishing and getting out there for some golf in March. But this year, we want to see how the Democratic majority will manage legislating and crafting a budget with impending federal opportunities and or challenges. I feel as though some of the things we heard last year, I was honored to represent WMATA, to some of the operational efficiencies they wanted to see. And this year, we're going to really concentrate on telling and crafting the story that WMATA and all of its partners have been extremely efficient over the past year and listened to the concerns that those in the budget office has had. So we're going to really drill down and concentrate on that. Right now, as everyone has said, not to be redundant, number one, we want to keep that funding in the FY 2026 budget, which is 84.5 million, and also maintain the temporary suspension of the cap. As the Speaker of the House said, he wants this session to be short and boring. I know it's going to be short. I doubt it's going to be boring. We will be having House of Delegate and gubernatorial elections in the following year, so there may be a lot of posturing. And also, there are a couple of budgetary challenges. We will be dealing with a surplus in the General Assembly. However, Medicaid is running at a deficit right now, so there are going to be several different opportunities and challenges that we may face navigating, one folks saying we need the money in the budget, others saying we need the money in the budget. We obviously have a need in Northern Virginia for quality transportation. As you said, Libby, and I agree with you, what happens at the federal level will be critical to telling our story. If we do get a return to work designation from President Trump, obviously that may boost the ridership levels for WMATA, which give us a compelling story to say, hey, we need $82.5 million to handle the influx of folks that are now returning to work on Monday through Friday. Just out there beyond transportation, number one, data center bills are going to be very, very critical this year. Energy use is going to be top line, number one topic, I believe. Senator Servo, who is not here this evening, said that this is going to be a data center session. Don't know if I agree with them. He's very agreeable. I love him if he's watching this right now. But there are going to be
No, he's not.
other issues. I'm on camera as well, so I'm gonna play that on. Sure. But solar sitting, local and state control over permitting, 3 constitutional amendments, if you're familiar, abortion, gay marriage, and automatic restoration of rights will be discussed in the General Assembly session as well as education and accrediting standards. So not to be long-winded, that's it. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitlow. I always, with General Assembly members, pontificating on how a session is going to go when you're a local government is, I should hesitate, I think, to do that, but thank you very much for the report. Session will come. Certainly there'll be discussion, and of course, there is preceding elections on January the 7th. That would be, could of course be quite relevant. But thank you very much, Mr. Whitlow. Any questions from folks? I don't see any, but I really appreciate the update. Thanks so much. And now we will turn to really lucky and grateful to be in a position of stepping back and honoring Chair Garvey, Chair of the Arlington County Board this year. Chair Garvey, for your long-standing service to Arlington.
Surviving.
No, I'm not. For your service, your public service, and your service to Arlington, and we have a proclamation. So I did not know. Ms. Garvey, Chair Garvey, has served on the NVTC since 2017. She's retiring as a member of the county board this year. She served with its distinction on VRE Operations Board, the Legislative Policy Committee, and Program Advisory Committee. And I will say, from a personal standpoint, I have learned a ton from you, Libby, and I'm grateful for it. And your commitment to public service is strong. You are committed to civility. You are also committed to curiosity and to integrity and representing Arlington well. And that means a level of strength that I think is super important in our public service as we all work through things. So I am very grateful personally, and we have a resolution of commendation, and I'll just pick out a couple of the key. We serve as a voice for transit, and you have been a leader there. I personally started my career in education. For those who don't know, Libby served on the school board for 15 years, right? And chaired it multiple times. And objectively, Arlington schools are better than all of the regions of the state. So, but they are good schools, and it is a testament to your leadership that we have good schools, because what we stand on the shoulders of those who've come before us. So on the BRE board as well, and we all have done a few, but I have this resolution. Also have this. I want to pause. We will do. I'll ask for a motion to approve the resolution commending the Honorable Libby Garvey on her departure from NBTC. So moved, Mr. Stork, and seconded by my colleague, Mr. Karantonis. Now, before we take a vote, I would open the floor to anyone who would want to add. This is not a moment to say that in every moment of every day, and I think this is not a bad thing to say that I've agreed with everything that Lydia shared, but it is that commitment to public service. And this year it has been an interesting road to have an 11-month-old while you have been caring for your 96-year-old mother.
96 and I'm checking in on my blink camera.
Oh, yeah, and my Nana tells me when my daughter is asleep. So I would say that app tells when we're asleep. So I'll just open the floor if anyone wishes to add in addition. But I just want to thank you so much. And also, to have before that I received no Latin in my education, and Libby has received a lot of Latin in her education, and the intelligence and the instincts are clear in so much of what we've done. So, Ms. Crispin.
Thank you. I served with Libby on COG last 4 years in my last term, and I just want to say that you've been a great mentor, and I've learned so much from you. I really enjoy our regional ethics call that we do every month, and I just want to thank you for your generosity with your wisdom and everything else that you've shared over the last 5 years that I've known you. And to please stay in touch, and thank you so much for everything you've done.
Thank you. Wisdom goes both ways, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crispin. Mr. Letourneau.
Yeah, to echo my Loudon colleague, I've known Libby a long time. We're kind of old timers up here. I'm not as old timer as you are. But no, I have always just appreciated you so much. Just the candor, and you have a habit of asking the questions everybody's thinking, maybe doesn't really want to say in a public meeting. But also, one thing I want to highlight is your commitment to preparedness and the role that local governments play in that. I know how active you've been at COG. You have tried to get me active in that, and I really wanted to do it. I just didn't have the bandwidth, maybe someday, but it's an important thing that you've brought a lot of leadership to. So I just want to recognize that as well. So we're going to miss you here.
Thank you, Mr. Smithberg.
Thank you. I too want to say how much I think we're going to miss your voice. And early on, when I was on council, I know we did a lot of work with Arlington together. We actually had several joint sessions to see how we could help and cooperate on various issues. And you always did spark debate, and by your comments and your thoughts. And as Matt said, I think you did at times say things that were on people's minds that may have been afraid or didn't have the confidence in their own voice to say it. So really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I mean, this all goes both ways. I'm a little uncomfortable by it, but I mean, thank you guys.
Well,
It's an honor being in this group.
Sure. I would just also say that it doesn't need to be the last word, but certainly saying confident and important things out loud. As a now 51-year-old guy, is important. It's important for us to have great, strong women leaders, and you have been that. And I think that is an important piece of the leadership. So with that, lest we get too ongoing and awkward unless there are additional comments, we'll go to a picture and Mr. Stork, go ahead. Oh, Mr. Karen.
First.
Okay, or will you, yes, go ahead. I don't want to cut off. of course.
Yeah, and I go way back.
Well, we go way back, but if I hadn't said something, Libby would have elbowed me really hard. We were on the school board together and we first met in Williamsburg is really where we
Probably, yeah.
got to know each other, and I think really all the comments that have been made here are exemplify the Libby that I first met, and frankly, she had been on the school board a couple of years before I was. But part of what you do as a new member of anything, right, is you're looking for somebody to kind of give you some guidance and give you some direction, and also help you know what to look for and maybe not what to spend time on. Part of what, so particularly I remember our lunches, because we'd grab our box lunch, we'd sit down and then I would learn, and we gained a lot of mutual trust and comfort with each other, and that was very long to the work that you've done. I know for me and supervisor in Traverse County has helped me to learn and agree to get better perform my work, and some of the tough decisions that we did, and there's some of the tough responses that you got to those were never easy, but I think the ones that you took after great effort and research and I know advocated them strongly, and I think that is our role as people. So, thank you very much, both personally and.
Thank you, thank you. I missed the two placards up, so thank you very much, Mr. Stork and Mr. Carantoni.
Very brief, Chairman, maybe everything is said, not everybody has said that, but I want to make sure that I leave that on the table. We're two regionalists and regional, so thank you for this specifically. It's difficult to be a regionalist and strong local government with strong local constituencies and a tri-state region on top of that where all these layers are actually not conducive. And you are one of these people who actually goes through this personal relationships with hard work, with political work, but through witted leadership and so forth for this. And it will be missed. We try to rebuild these assets as we go.
Thank you. Best vice chair I've ever had, by the way.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks much. The thing that I think we could all take away from the many lessons that Libby has provided us is her enthusiasm for public service. We all work hard at what we do, but we're also some of the luckiest people in the world to be elected officials at this time, at this place. So Libby, thanks a lot for the enthusiasm that you've brought and to the job, and it's a great lesson for all of us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. So we will also take enthusiasm and I know you would say courage as we face the next chapters that are ahead of us. So with that, probably everyone has said everything. But let's do a picture if we can. And please.
Can we get a vote?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, the resolution.
What's that?
Did I move the resolution if it hasn't already been moved?
It's been moved and seconded.
Oh, okay, third.
We will now ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And there are no abstentions or opposition.
You have to ask.
And Mr. Snyder, I'll take you as an aye as well. I will.
You bet. You bet.
We'll say now is the right time to give Libby a hand. Thank you. And so it's not hard for one more round. Okay, with that, We will move on to item 7E, which is the federal update. Which may seem a little anticlimactic, but there's plenty of fireworks federal update can provide. So Ms. McCutcheon, over to you.
So Mr. Chair, just, I'll be honest, we have a wonderful write-up in our materials, and I think that we got a good preview from a lot of board members. There's a lot of stuff to watch for, and that's what we're doing right now. And so I think as things unfold with the new Congress as well as with the White House, we'll have a lot more report in that space. So I don't want to speculate on things that are just right now in a perspective. So, I do, if I could just move on to the next, I am actually really excited, to remind folks about our legislative forum that we're doing joint with PRTC and DRE next Friday. We're over 200 people at RSVP for that, which is significantly more than we've had in the past. We're excited to have a fantastic lineup of people there. Again, it's next Friday, December 13th at 8:30. And for those who asked, program will be starting before 9 a.m. because we want to fit it all in, so do not be late. But we do have Senator Lucas is going to be providing some opening and welcoming remarks. Then we're going to move to a transit GM panel that is going to include Dash, WMATA, VRE, PRTC, and I'll be moderating that. And then we're going to be moving to, we really are excited to have a wonderful panel talking about DMV moves and SJ 28, opening with Mr. Smedberg, moderated by Nick Donahue. And then we've got several of our members here, as well as Mr. McKay, and Senator Boysko joining. So it really, I think it's going to be an energizing, and rewarding morning. And we have already included all the commissioners on our list of RSVPs. So I know that Rhonda will be sending out a little bit more information, but it really should be, I think, an amazing event. Lots of staff work has gone into it, so I do need to thank the team for putting this all together. It's going to be really important event this Monday. So that is what I have on the legislative.
Great. You better stop me if you have any questions, because we're a little behind schedule. So I think it's going to be a great event. Panels are good. Let's move on to item 8. We have a staff presentation regarding the preliminary FY 26 general and administrative budget and 2025-2026 work plan, which both will come back to action at the January meeting. So this is not the final chance to ask questions. You have them, you ask them, but first, Kate and Scott, please give your presentation. I'll go straight to Scott unless there's.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start things off and then hand it off over to Scott. And so just in general, is that the budget that we are proposing and sharing this evening, again, not for action until our January 16th meeting, is really focusing on making sure that we continue to retain our staff and keep them really getting the training that they needed, the compensation that they needed, and making sure that we're meeting obviously all of the priorities of the commission. We talked a lot about the work we have going on, especially in support of things like SJ 28, the DMV moves. Our ability to do that really comes down to the way that our budget is. And so they're really the drivers of our budget. I know that Scott's going to get back into just a minute, but just super high level. We do everything we can to identify, to align the way our compensation of staff is with our jurisdictions. That's actually something that's actively done, both in making sure we're benchmarking, as well as cost of living and merit increases. We want to make sure that we're meeting the commission's priorities, meeting all of the requirements we have, and continuing all of the, the really highly involved regional technical and coordination efforts. And again, it's keeping things like we have a small bit of research. We'll talk about that a little bit later, as well as keeping our human resources and legislative support intact. So that's really, our budget, our operating budget is really the folks that you see coming here and supporting and the great work that we have here. And so that's really what's driving things. Scott, do you want to dive into the next slide of the budget drivers?
So this slide is a high-level view of MVTC general and administrative expenses. And it could be pretty much rolled up into 4 different cost categories: salaries and related payroll costs, rent, contracted services, and other expenses. And as expected, salaries and the related costs make up most of MVTC's budget at 74%. Contracted services equal 12%, and this includes technical support for our Zero Choice program, research support, legal, HR support, auditing,
and the state legislative service. The fixed lease for MVPC's office space is 10% of the total budget, and then other expenses make up the balance according to that. Slide. We're moving on to the revenue side of things. As you all know, most of the funding for the budget is from the revenue taken off the top of the state aid that comes into MVPC on behalf of the member jurisdictions. In fiscal year 25, MVPC expects to manage about 286 million in state assistance. And about 1.2 of that directed to MVPC's budget. Local jurisdictions also provide direct contributions to MVPC from their budgets, and that equals about 6% of the total revenues. Community choice revenue makes up 14% of the total, and this funding is to support the direct costs of carrying out the program, including payroll and outside consultants. Other revenue, which includes other project chargebacks, interest earnings, makes up about 6% of the total. And this includes grant revenue for MVPC's intern program, Vision Group 7, and staff support for PRA. And also a carryover of available surplus is included as a source of revenue. And that's the amount of positive budget variances in previous years that's above the minimum operating requirements. The next slide. So this slide is a summary of the expenditures included in the full budget document, which is included in the meeting materials. That document shows this information in much greater detail. This year, there really are not many significant changes from the previous budget. However, some of the highlights are, as shown on the very last line of this slide. Proposed budget shows an increase in total expenditures of $138,550, which is a 2.9% increase over the current year. Most of this increase is due to salaries, as shown on the first line, with a 3.5% increase. Budget does hold staff levels constant, and includes the provision for cost of living and merit increases. Benefits and other payroll costs are expected to increase only about 1%. Administrative costs are shown in total with some of the detail below. That increase is 4.9% overall. Most of this increase is due to rent, which is based on the fixed lease of MVPC's office space. And other than those items, the budget is very flat. That's all I have on expenditures, unless there's any questions.
Okay, Mr. Sickles.
Yeah, I have a question on it. I know that transit fund is flowed through several different formulas and it's complicated. So MVTC manages 286 million in state aid. Does that include the money that flows through from the feds to the state to here, or is there such thing?
Now, this is strictly stated.
Yeah, state aid. Well, it's not, okay. Do you manage any federal funds coming from here?
We have a very small amount. We have currently a single earmark for Route 7, and we, on behalf of one or two of our jurisdictions, we help them manage federal grants. We have very little federal money that comes through.
So the free money goes straight to WMATA. Well, I mean, we say we don't get any dedicated, we don't have any dedicated money for transit, but we have 286 million coming from the state, but that's not dedicated. I mean, there's a little disjoint, on how we define things, maybe. I mean,
We haven't used the word dedicated a lot. I know that.
other people have. WMATA has never had a dedicated source of fund. That's something we hear from team.
From the federal.
No, from anywhere. Yeah, no, from anywhere.
Yeah. But, and what you're saying is the 286 million is state money. And the question is whether, you can parse the word dedicated.
I guess, yeah.
It doesn't
Go ahead.
flow automatically.
It doesn't flow automatically.
It's still, the point is it's subject to annual appropriation
Okay.
Every year.
So like in New York, there's a automatic revenue stream that just is not subject to anybody's legislative action.
It's like the fair one.
Yeah. That's how we kind of define that word.
We'll, yeah, we'll have to, that's a, we'll have to be aware of that and be mindful of that. Glad you raised it, I guess, Matt's points really help sort of clarify it, but, to some extent, but fair question for sure. And we can also follow up on how that is heard in addition, but, Scott, you got 2 or 3 slides that I hope you didn't have to.
I mean, it's our fair share of state funding. I'm not saying it's not a
So
fair share.
before my time, but I believe there were times when it always appeared at the local level that the state will come after the fall. We're largely, I think it happened in the past.
Doesn't most of this funds come through our gas tax and various gas taxes and formulas? Well, so we can get half of it in Northern Virginia.
Yeah, so I actually think that that's mostly goes through NVTA, but some of it comes from.
No, actually,
Yes.
so the funding that comes from the Commonwealth Mass Transit accounts, 43.5% does come to this trust fund that we're talking about. So we are, so when it comes to state aid, we also manage the regional gas tax, which is a part of this as well. But there is a conversation about what the definition of dedicated, I have been sensitive to using that word. I do understand WMATA's perspective on this. There is a portion in code percentage of the Commonwealth Mass Transit account that is provided, some could say dedicated to the payments of WMATA. So there is a conversation about the worst use of that word.
Sure.
It really makes sense.
Got it. Okay. Glad to, I mean, better to ask and work it through. So, and particularly, those who have been such, as we look towards the coming session and the continued leadership, that we will follow up as needed, and it's a fair concern. So we'll go to Scott. Go ahead.
Next slide, please. So similar to the previous slides, it's a summary of the revenues that are included in the budget. Local contributions, as I said, make up most of the local share from state aid received by MVPC and direct local contribution. That all increased by 183,950 or 5% over last year or current year. Interest were holding flat. Project chargebacks are expected to also remain fairly flat, as are the project grant billings, which are partially funded in the intern program. Available appropriated surplus or carryover funding will decrease this year. As mentioned, this represents prior year favorable budget variances in excess of our anticipated minimum operating requirements. And that's all I have for revenue as well. Like I said, there's really not all that much of it in the budget. Next slide.
So one of the things that we've included in our budget, and this is actually including in the actual budget document we've highlighted here, is if you recall a little bit earlier this calendar year, we passed the strategic plan for research. And so what I wanted to do is articulate what are the types of research activities that are going on at NVTC. And one of the things that I want to demonstrate is we actually have some that are done in-house by the talented staff within. Some are actually being done by grants that are actually not costing anything. We've got a wonderful technical assistance grant that we got from the federal government that's actually not costing us or our localities anything. It's just to do with shared infrastructure for zero emission bus. And then there's a number of different things in which we've got cost share, whether we're getting grants from DRPT or we're sharing them with others. So that's just an overview. We plan on continuing this in our budget document of what are the types of research activities. We do have $250,000 that is in our budget. That is a line item for research. And so the things that NVTC is funding, they come within that budget item. It is, at this point in time, we have not been coming back to ask for additional funding for additional research. We're doing it within the budget that you're approving. And that's something that we put in place just a couple of years ago. So we didn't have to sort of piecemeal when we wanted to be responding to research requests by the commission. And then finally, the last slide is just an overview of all the activities that we have going on in our work plan. The draft work plan is included in your materials. That's something we put together every year. That's when I say the work plan, it is all of the staff are contributing, they are putting the deliverables and the activities that they are working on. That is something that we've obviously put out to the public and put out to all of you, and it is a companion document to our budget. So when folks look at our budget, the work plan is saying really what that's paying for. So this is just sort of a bulleted list of all the different things we have going on. Many of these things we do end up bringing to the committee or the full commission. There's just a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, so thank you very much for, I know that you worked through these two slides. I hope you did not create every bullet on this last slide in particular. I hope that some of your staff did a little bit of that because it is both great that you are familiar with the material on this and the preceding one. And also great to have a team that does this rather than just alone. So that is, that covers the budget. That's, is there anything else, Scott, that you or Kate wanted to present on the budget? Okay, so this is, let's just see, any questions for staff on the budget and work plan? At this point, keeping in mind that this will come back for action at the January 16th commission meeting. NVTC will continue to receive public comments on the work plan for December 27th. All the comments will be compiled and included in the meeting materials for January 16th. Onward to item 9, which is a public hearing. We now turn to our public hearing, which received public comment on the work plan, and thank you very much, Scott, on the work plan and NVTC's guiding principles for future transit funding. Do we have each year, the MBT provides the public with the opportunity to submit comments via online video recording, email, audio recording, or in person. I do believe we have speakers here.
We do not have any speakers here.
We do not, so we will move on to no items, no individuals. We did not receive any speakers, so we'll continue on. And the public hearing is closed, seeing as we do not have speakers. Item 10, Mr. Dahl is here tonight to give this CEO report, and VRE Vice Chair Sarah Bagley will present the VRE action items, which will be followed by a block vote on the 3 resolutions. VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield will also give us an update on the FY 2026 VRE budget. Over to you, item 10A, VRE CEO report and minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just be, of course, concise here. You do have a CEO report package. Just a couple of things. From a system performance standpoint, we have previously been tracking the last 4 or 5 months in the mid-70s. We've climbed back up slightly over 80% and still trending upward. So that's a positive sign. For the month of November, our total ridership is down from the previous month. Of course, we only operated 19 days and have had about a week and a half of the Thanksgiving holiday there. So, and then just finally, we will be operating our annual Santa trains on December 14th. All the public tickets sold out very quickly, but I do know a few folks that have a few. So if you still need a couple of tickets, let me know. And I'll get those to you. But for those that have participated in that event that we've done, I think about 30 years out of 32 years of our existence, it's a very good quality. That's my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Dole? Seeing none, we'll send it to Ms. Bagley to present the 4 VRE action items, which we will take a block vote on at the end.
Okay, here we go. For action 10B, the VRE Operations Board recommends the commission approval of resolutions 2545, which approves the VRE 2025 legislative agenda, which covers federal and state legislative issues. We had a presentation on this at last month's meeting. Item 10C is to approve resolution 2546, which is to accept and authorize distribution of VRE's FY 2024 annual comprehensive financial report. The board recommends commission approval of resolution 2546, accepting the annual comprehensive financial report and associated information from the auditors, and authorize distribution of this report. The audit of VRE's FY 2024 financial statement has been completed, and the auditing firm of B. Mayers has issued an unmodified opinion The opinion letter states that the VRE financial statements in all material respects fairly and accurately present the financial position of the organization. This opinion is the best outcome of a financial audit. The auditors met with the VRE Audit Committee and the full Operations Board meeting in November. And finally, item 10D. For action 10D, the VRE Operations Board recommends commission approval of resolution 2547, which will authorize the VRE CEO to submit on behalf of the commission's VRE applications to the I-395-95 Commuter Choice FY 26-27 program, to make any necessary corrections to the project amount or descriptions in the applications, and execute all project funding agreements that may result from the consideration of the VRE applications. VRE staff have identified 2 projects for submittal that support and implement planned service enhancement authorized in the Transforming Maryland, Virginia initiative, the Leland Road Station Improvement Project and the Brook Station Improvement Project. Just a reminder, the commission's authorization does not confer endorsement of any VRE application in relation to the adopted I-395-95 commuter choice project selection process. This concludes my presentation of the 3 VRE action items. VRE staff are here to answer any questions from commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Bagley. Do commissioners have questions on the VRE items before we do a block vote? Mr. Creasy?
Why is it not an endorsement? What's the reasoning behind it?
Mr. Dalton, perhaps you can, I can offer thoughts. Mr. Waukeshaw's ready, but go ahead, Mr. Dalton.
So just to be clear, this is you're just giving me, the CEO, authorization to submit the application. Obviously, what's that?
To us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right back to you, so.
So we can't pre-authorize a decision that will eventually come back to us. Right. It's fine. Okay. I'm glad you asked, and for sure, and it sort of reflects, as we think about the block votes, these are issues that have already been surfaced through all of these, I think, have been surfaced through the VRE board, and I believe Ms. Bromke is the chair this year. And so that is a level of which deference, but not unthinking approval is a good way to approach it, Mr. Krizik. I'm glad you surfaced that. So with that, yes, Mr.
If it's short enough, can you do a 2-sentence explanation of what the legislative agenda is? The VRE?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Short.
Just real short?
Yeah.
Okay, the legislative agenda, just, we never broke out both the state and the federal side. The state side, just simply, there is one action that we're gonna continue to pursue, and that has to do with, some tax liability as it relates to, liability insurance that we pay. This is something we took to the General Assembly last year, and actually, I don't know if defer is the right word, but
carried over.
We'll come back and come back and look at that again. And then, of course, just simply, just be responsive to any other transportation type related issues. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Glad you asked. I mean, you may get to see it, so glad you got a preview there for sure. So with that, can I have a motion to approve the 3 VRE resolutions as a block vote? That's resolution 2545, approve the legislative agenda. Resolution 2546, accept and authorize distribution of VRE's 2024 annual comprehensive financial report, and 2547, the VRE's authorize the VRE CEO to submit on behalf of the commission's VRE applications to the I-395-95 commuter choice fiscal year 2026-2027 program.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Working straight to the end. And Ms. Karantonis, with the second, any further discussion? Seeing none, at least seeing none. I don't think so. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Schneider?
Aye.
Thank you very much. The motion passes. Now we'll turn to Mr. Schofield to please give the budget presentation. Mr. Schofield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will be coming to the operations board later this month to present our recommended FY 26 budget. Hopefully we'll provide that recommendation, and then we will be back here at the commission in January. This is a quick update on where we are. We are in the home stretch. I'll talk briefly about the operating budget and the capital program and then a couple of the open items that we're still dealing with. So next slide, please. The operating budget that we presented back in September was approximately $118 million. We expect to be coming in later this month at about that same number. We've had some puts and takes. We've been working on reducing our department budgets, but at the same time, we're looking at some increases in things like the liability insurance that we mentioned. But overall, we will be about flat or even down a little bit compared to current year. This is primarily because debt that we have on 11 of our rail cars will be going away this year. And also, as we discussed, the changes that are coming out of the areas for this of the Manassas line and us not having to pay access fees to NS. So that is good. The budget will continue to provide the necessary support to initiate the Saturday service. And then the two big policy items, which we'll come back to here in just a minute. We currently do not have programmed in an increase in the passenger fares after having a 5% increase in this current year. And the staff proposal is for an increase in the jurisdictional contribution 8%, of 19 million. Excuse me, increasing to $19.8 million. Next slide, please. So our 6-year capital program is really in a very dynamic period right now. We have 3 large projects that we just cut the ribbons on within the last 12 to 18 months. The Blue, Quantico, and the Fredericksburg Station project. I know a number of you were at one or more of those. So those will be dropping out of the capital program. We have the property acquisition on the Manassas line that will be broken out as its own large project. We have about a dozen ongoing projects that you will see in the capital program in prior years. Those are projects that maybe are in construction, like the Manassas Park parking garage and the acquisition of expansion rail cars. We have projects like Alexandria and Franconia Springfield, which are very close to going into construction. And then we have projects like Backlick Road, which are still in kind of the design and engineering stages. We have a couple of projects really more down in the PRTC region that are still kind of, I would say, in transition. They're still in the capital program, but they've been sort of changing as the TRB program has been evolving. And actually, Brook and Leland are 2 of those, and Rich just mentioned those as ones that we are applying for grant funding. Then we also have, because this is a multi-year program, we have sort of out-year projects where maybe we've identified a need, but we don't necessarily have our money lined up yet. So in addition to expansion rolling stock, we also have crossovers on the Manassas line. We think can really help to improve our operational flexibility. And then last but not least, we have our ongoing very important state of good repair asset management programs for our equipment, our yards and stations, and then also all the investments that we make in information technology. So our capital program, our current capital program over the 6 years is about 1.3 billion. Like coming in roughly about that same number this time around as well. Next slide, please. We did our required master agreements survey back in October, determining the jurisdiction of residents of all of our riders. Relatively steady from year to year as it normally is, but I think the 2 big notes, one is that Stafford County dropped below the threshold for having 2 seats on the operations board, so they will only have 1 now. And then 2 counties in particular had sort of stronger ridership recovery compared to last year. One was Spotsylvania, the other was Rex County. So those 2 counties in particular are seeing a larger share of the jurisdictional contribution coming onto them. As I mentioned, we are still sort of hammering out a few things. You know, the operations board has been asking us to provide some options or some ideas. But how do we come to the right balance between what the passengers pay, what the jurisdictions pay? How much do we continue to draw down on the pandemic money? It is true if you look at kind of the historical data that our passenger fares have recently kind of lagged behind both inflation and the transit benefit that a lot of our riders get. We did not include an increase in the preliminary budget. We're still discussing, you know, would we want to do one? We can kind of take a wait and see approach. We don't necessarily have to do it as a part of the budget adoption. And then if that looks to be the way that we would go, would we try to trade that off purely just against using less of the pandemic money, or would we potentially look at reducing the jurisdictional contribution? So those are kind of the outstanding items we've got right now. So
Thank you very much,
that's
Mr.
where we are.
Thank you, appreciate it. Are there questions on are there questions now, keeping in mind that the VRE budget will come back to the commission for action at the January meeting? Yes.
Just one thing that Mark didn't mention is that historically, and tell me how many years this has been the case, Mark. VRE has in year one done a fare increase, and in year two done a jurisdictional subsidy increase. That has always been, maybe not always, but for a very long time has been a practice that our riders and our jurisdictions have planned for. And we are having a discussion, somewhat over my objections, about potentially altering that this year, but historically that is what we've done. And my personal view is if we feel like fares have not risen fast enough to meet inflation, then next year is the time to address that in our normal cycle.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Waukesha. You have Mr. Smedberg.
Just a quick question. A lot of great agencies and groups are looking at their capital side and fearful of cliffs coming or real challenges coming. You had that one slide that highlighted some of the projects. What's your, big picture position right now? Or what's your situation when it comes to the capital side?
Oh, on the capital side, I don't think there's really any cliff potentially coming. The cliff in terms of the pandemic money is really on the operating side for VRE. And again, that's been looking at as 2028 or so for us. On the capital side, in terms of having, the FDA formula money, having pretty good state support out of various programs, I feel like we have a cliff coming along.
Is Long Bridge going to impact your budget at all? Or?
Long Bridge being a VPRA project, we are contributing to VPRA right now as a part of the DRB deal to help with Long Bridge, but ultimately that's a VPRA project.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know it's your project. It will impact you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Perhaps on the benefits on the operating side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just curious.
Definitely from the capacity side.
Yes.
Yeah, then hopeful, right? That's all we're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the discussion and the work, and mindful of the urgency to which Mr. Waukesha, Bagley, you all have been working on as you approach the coming fiscal years towards 28. Mindful that there's plenty of work to do, and appreciate you doing it in the report. So that budget will come back to us. Also appreciate Mr. Schofield, your presentation, and your big picture acumen as well as your conciseness. So we will go on. We have newly appointed DRPT Director, Ms. Robinson, here with us tonight. Welcome again. Would you like to share a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I already introduced myself at the beginning, and part of the director's report that you all should have in your package included that introduction, so I won't belabor that. I have nothing else to add if it's not already in the report.
Which means you are very smart because revenue. After 9 o'clock. See, my daughter is that's awesome. We'll get back on schedule. So now we'll turn to the executive director's report, and then we have a closed session on VRE, if I'm correct. But first, I believe Ms. Mathias, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have, of course, the latest newsletter here, with got lots of great highlights, including, a really nice quick snapshot on the formula changes for WMATA, as well as some of the cost containment, things that WMATA has recently been putting out there in the public. So that's just a nice little quick reference. Just a, not to worry about the event next Friday. I'll say it many, many times. Our next commission meeting is 16th of January, not the 2nd. We will not be here on the 2nd. We'll be here on the 16th. And we will make sure that we have material, of course, our materials are always out a week ahead of time. And we're already working behind the scenes on making sure that we've got a good deadline to get those comments back to you on the draft resolution. Public actually can comment on that draft resolution and our work plan until December 27th. So that's really for those watching on YouTube. So those will all be able to line up. The financial reports are included as a blue item. And so I do not have any additional reports. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Mathias. Any questions for Ms. Mathias? Financial report, or general comments or questions, you don't self-censor if you've got something you want to add. Also, don't make up a question if you don't have one. So with that, we'll turn to item 13, which is closed session. We now have a closed session for the public. We do return to open session. The YouTube feed will continue with a muted and a screen notice stating that we are in closed session. The meeting will resume live when we return to open session. In case of technical difficulties and the live feed is interrupted, viewers should check our YouTube channel for a new feed. Can I have a motion, please? Someone to move into closed session. Ms. Bagley, is there a second? By Mr. Alcorn. Pursuant to, so we have that motion pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, section 2.2-3711, A1 of the Code of Virginia, the Northern Virginia moves to convene a closed session to discuss personnel matter concerning the VRE Chief Executive Officer and the VRE General Counsel's performance evaluation. That is the motion with objection from Ms. Bagley or Mr. Alcorn. That is the motion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Motion passes. And now we will move to closed session. I'll get staff and everybody a chance to leave the room if you like. Unless you. We're all set. We're now back in open session. Welcome back to the public and staff listening via YouTube live stream. Can I have a motion for the closed session certification? So moved, Mr. Walkinshaw. And we will, let's see, I think we'll have to take that for everyone. I'll read the certification and then we'll do the motion after that. My apologies for being disjointed there. The Northern Union Transportation Commission certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge and with no individual member dissenting at the just concluded closed session, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Freedom of Information Act were discussed, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed session was convened were heard, discussed, or considered. It was moved by Mr. Walkinshaw. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Bagley. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder?
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes. And we will now turn it to Ms. Bagley for a motion with respect to the second employment agreement, I believe.
Sure, yeah, so, coming out of closed session, I move that the North Transportation Commission approve the second amendment to the employment agreement with Stephen Gizek, and that the chair be authorized to execute it on behalf of the commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Evan. Further discussion. We'll take this opportunity and just very briefly, Mr. Dalton and Mr. McIsaac, just on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for what you do. I picture you doing public service down south and speeding up here, thinking about the public service to be here, or not speeding illegally, but speeding up here.
Thank you for.
But I do think you know each of us well enough, almost all of us well enough to know that we do appreciate public service that stewards our institutions is not inevitable. We really know that, and you guys both are, you gentlemen are both committed to it. Is there other discussion or thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on behalf of my fellow VRE board members and the commission generally, just really want to express our appreciation. It's been a significant year for VRE in terms of capital projects and ribbon cuttings that were referenced, and as well as the Manassas line acquisition and the long-term impact that will have. And the two of you have been central, and your expertise really helped guided a lot of those successes. And so just wanted to express our appreciation for bringing us to this point and hopefully setting up VRE for a really successful future.
Other comments? I see head nods, which could be eloquent, long-winded talks, but you don't need that at 9:49 at night. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder?
Aye.
Great, the motion passes. This concludes our meeting. That's the news, and we're out.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider.